Well, hello, fellow Sojourners. Spencer Payton is with me today. We're going to do something a bit different as opposed to just me talking. The two of us are just going to walk through a passage. You can't see us, but we are 6 feet away from each other.
Barely.
Barely. leaving room for the Holy Spirit, You know what I'm trying to say? So anyway, we're going to walk through part of Luke 12.
That's the plan.
That's the plan. Spencer, where should we start?
Well, I can just go ahead and start reading it if we want to do it that way. Just fasten your seatbelts, everybody. This is gonna be something.
Hold on. Here we go.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go ahead and start reading it, and then we can just see where we go.
Okay. Beginning.
I'm not sick. Don't worry.
Is it a dry cough?
No, it's not. It's not a dry cough.
Okay.
That was a bit of a wet cough, so I think we're okay.
Okay. All right. Verse 22?
Yeah, verse 22.
Yeah, we're gonna. Okay. So the plan is to discuss the passage about anxiety here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's just walk through this and see where we go.
All right. And he said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap, they have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do a small thing such as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow, they neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, and with treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also."
This is reminiscent of the passage we did a few weeks ago at church out of Matthew, but I think this one, you had mentioned before we started that this one has a little bit more.
It's a little bit more detailed.
Yeah, and I agree with you. There's also some stuff in there. It seems like he, and maybe it's just me, or maybe it's just the way I'm seeing it right now, but it feels like the father image is really present. You know, like it's very much on the surface.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's kind of sticking out to me. He mentions father. The father's mentioned in Matthew too, but I don't know. In that little phrase, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom."
Yeah,
it's so sweet. You know, it's I don't know. It's comforting.
Right.
Anyways,
right.
Yeah.
So the kind of the whole mindset that got me thinking about this passage in the first place. So I was listening to a series by the Bible Project podcast over generosity, and they kind of start the discussion talking about abundance, right?
Right.
And how it is that Jesus can say these things in the midst of a world that appears to us to be so contrary to what we see depicted here as just like a simple sort of childlike trust in the fact that there is enough for everybody. The world is not completely, rid of resources for those who need them,
right?
And to just not be anxious, right? And how it is that you can have that mindset when you look out in the world and it seems to be so completely different from that a large majority of the time.
Yeah. He seems to be almost appealing to a common sense theme. Like, you all know that there's plenty to go around, right? You all know that these things are taken care of.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And
I mean, so like just a super practical example of that was just a few weeks ago, whenever you and I were going to Louisville, you came to pick me up at the house, and I was kind of reading through, either it was this passage or the one in Matthew about anxiety.
Sure.
And I was telling you that just after I had read that passage, I was kind of trying to process through it, and I was going to go outside, let the dog out and walk around a little bit, and right out in front of my porch, with the big glassed-in windows, there was just a dead bird right there in the driveway.
Right.
I remember telling you, I was like, so what about that one? You know,
I thought his eye was on the sparrow. For
right.
crying out loud.
Apparently not. Yeah. So
not that sparrow. He must have missed. He got lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, yeah. I mean, there's just, as somebody who does kind of struggle with anxiety and always has, and as we are kind of in this anxious time where a lot of people who may not experience anxiety as much are definitely kind of thrown into that mix now.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's kind of gotten ratcheted up on the spectrum just a little bit.
Right.
You know,
If you're already there, then you're...
If you're already there, really hold on. If
Yeah.
you weren't there, you probably are feeling some tension now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, I was just kind of thinking that this might be an interesting topic to land on because, you know, where else better to go than what Jesus says directly about anxiety?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that also is hitting me as I see this, I'm trying to think about it, you know, because it'd be easy for me just to jump back and say, well, let me just talk about the points that I mentioned a few weeks ago. Yeah. But to be quite honest, I was living in a different world a few weeks ago, you know?
Yeah.
And we all were. And so I'm trying to read this kind of with fresh eyes. And one of the things that I'm seeing here that I don't think that I saw before was just kind of the plurality of it. You know, how Jesus is sort of, even that little phrase, fear not, little flock. It is your
Right.
Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. You know, there's this sense in which he is not, he's not speaking only to their, in some ways, I think when we tend to process anxiety, and when I typically go to prepare a talk on anxiety, I typically approach it from dealing with anxiety as an individual. I think I even talked about that specifically when I gave the sermon a few weeks ago out of Matthew. And he is kind of going out of his way to seemingly bring them into a sense of togetherness, of your Father is taking care of y'all, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not that. In some ways, it is sort of that individual mentality, that Western mentality that leads us to see a dead bird and say, well, maybe God doesn't care.
Sure.
Right.
Right. Well, and the other place that my mind goes to a lot, at least whenever I had read this in the past, it's like, well, I'm not really worried about food or what clothes I'm going to wear. I'm worried about not dying from a virus. You know,
Right.
That
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It feels like, well, that's not.
Yeah, it's the temptation is to look at the specifics and lose the forest for the trees, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think how to wrap my head around this and put words to it, because it seems like there's a couple things that's being articulated here, and you can kind of feel it through the, but it's sort of kind of, I don't know, I guess you could categorize it like in two ways. But one of the big things is it seems like these are the things that we do to keep us safe, or we use to keep us safe, or we use to keep us in some measure presentable to the world, maybe affirmable,
Or
from
at
other
least
people.
kind of maintain your sense of control over your own little corner of the universe.
Yeah,
right?
it seems like the big umbrella is that this is what I use to keep control over my life. And then you have these little subcategories of this is how I keep myself safe, or this is how I keep myself presentable. You know, those seem to be one of the big, the kind of subcategories going down from that.
Yeah, I saw a quote from David Powelson on Instagram yesterday where he said, most of the noise in our souls is generated by our attempts to control the uncontrollable. Kind of comes to mind with this.
Yeah, it does kind of work itself back to what we're using to try to control life. Yeah.
So, so in connection with this, basically, a lot of what I've been processing through is kind of coming out of my listening to the Bible Project talk about this. So I would recommend anybody who's listening to this right now to go check that out, because it's probably going to be a more eloquently expressed sort of, deep dive into this. But what they did is
gooder talking.
Yeah. We could kind of follow the path that they lay down here. So, like, how is it that that what worldview is it that not only Jesus, but first century Jews at that time had cultivated to where that this wasn't a completely foreign mindset to them as it is to us in our sort of Western
Right.
capitalist sort of way of seeing the world.
Yeah,
right?
how is Jesus able to make this sort of common sense appeal
Right.
to them?
Right.
Yeah.
And their main point was, well, he was raised on the Hebrew scriptures, right? Meditating on them day
Right.
and night.
Right.
Right. That is what cultivates your worldview. And so we could go back. It's one of my favorite Psalms anyways, and now it's just kind of been like recontextualized now as I've been processing all of these passages in Luke and in the Gospels, and just with my own anxiety and just in the way the world has been lately. Reading Psalm 104, which is one of the Psalms that kind of details creation, retells the Genesis story in a way.
Right.
Some of the details are different, which is kind of an interesting, I guess, nerdy discussion you could get into, but that's not really the point.
That's right. A side trip worth taking.
Maybe so for another time.
On a different
But
journey.
So I read Luke 12, and this one's longer if you want to read. If you want to read some of Psalm 104 for us.
Go through the whole thing.
Oh, sure.
Should we just read the whole thing? What a great psalm. All right, Psalm 104. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. He lays the beams of his chamber on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. He rides on the wings of the wind. He makes his messengers winds, his ministers a flaming fire. He set the earth on its foundation so that it should never be moved. You covered it with the deep as a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they took flight. The mountains rose. The valleys sank down to the place that you had appointed for them. You had a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Beside them the birds of the heavens dwell. They sing among the branches. From your lofty abode you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock, and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted, and in them the birds build their nest. The stork has her home in the fir trees. The high mountains are for the wild goats. The rocks are a refuge for the rock badgers. He made the moon to mark the seasons. The sun knows its time for setting. You make darkness, and it is night. Then all the beasts of the forest creep about. The young lions roar for their prey, seeking their food from God. When the sun rises, they steal away and lie down in their dens. Man goes out to his work and to his labor until the evening. O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Here is the sea, great and wide, which teems with creatures innumerable, living things both small and great. There go the ships and Leviathan, which you formed to play in it. These all look to you, to give them their food in due season. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works, who looks on the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountain and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. May my meditation be pleasing to him. For I rejoice in the Lord. Let sinners be consumed from the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Praise the Lord. There it is.
So, I mean, it can't just be me that feels like that is the second half of what we just read.
Yeah, there's a definite theme of God's care for his creatures. And it's an understood reality. It's an assumed reality. You know this is how God works. This you know how creation is sustained. God is behind it.
Yeah. I don't really know how to necessarily express it, but there's just a sense in which this passage by itself it's comforting.
Sure.
In a sense. It makes you feel small, yet cared for and provided for.
Yeah.
There's a sense of comfort for it. And the same goes for the passage in Luke as well. Jesus' teachings about that. But there's something that just even in these past few days, kind of piecing these two together in comparison with one another and kind of letting them read each other.
Yeah.
That has been really beneficial for me.
Yeah. Well, I think you said it. I think when you said that that a passage like this, you said makes you feel small, but it puts you in perspective, right? It puts you in the context of all creation, and Jesus does that in Luke 12. Psalm 104 does that. It reminds you of who's really in control and where you sit in the structure of things. And I think that based on what we said earlier, if the overarching umbrella of all of these issues is springing from our desire to control the things we can't, that means it's also springing from our sort of the misconception that we actually are in a position to be able to affect and control the things that we can't, right?
Right.
And the reason why I think this psalm, even by itself, is comforting is because it does put us back into the structure of where we sit, where God is on his throne, in control, taking care of the world and us and everything in his time. And we aren't. It's sort of a psalm that takes off of our shoulders all of the things that we try to put on.
Yeah.
And I think it's what Jesus is doing in Luke 12. He's trying to take the stuff off people's shoulders.
Right. Well, and because just being told that you're small and not in control is not reassuring unless you are
immediately
also
frightening.
Right. Yeah, it makes things worse.
Exactly.
The only way that helps is if you are simultaneously being reminded of the fact that the one who is in control is a generous giver to all of the creatures that he has created, including you and I, and the rock badgers as well.
The rock badgers.
In verse 18.
And the one who is in control also loves you more than you even love yourself.
Right.
Right. And all of that is
That's why the advice, well, just don't worry about it. Because you can't control it. So what's
yeah. You don't have any power. You can't do anything about it. So just let it go.
I know.
That is actually that makes
you're not
it worse.
telling me any new information with that, right?
No. Yeah. It's just making it worse.
Yeah. So that's why, I think it's really easy to twist Jesus' words to do that, though. If you don't have the underlying, if you don't have the structure and the support of something like Psalm 104 to back it.
Right.
In the sense that, this isn't in your control. And that's a good thing, right?
Right. Well, and it even doesn't even do any good just to say, you're not in control, but God is in control.
Right, because what do you mean by God?
Well, yeah, and how do I know I can trust him? I think that's why one of the maybe sort of the missing link between that piece is when Peter says, to cast your anxieties on God because he cares for you.
Yeah.
There's that sense that I think that in the absence of not knowing that he cares for us, his power and control doesn't necessarily seem. How do we know that's benevolent? How do we know that's good? How do we know that he's gracious? How do we know, How do we know that he actually cares for us and that he would be controlling all things in a way that would work them out for our ultimate good?
Yeah.
We don't know that just by saying he's in control and you're not. We need that missing piece of the one who is in control. The one who is in control cares for you more than you can care for yourself.
Yeah.
And I heard someone say once, and it's sort of been I don't know, sort of a mantra for me. And when I pray, in some ways, mantra probably isn't the most Christian word to use, but but that idea that when I'm in prayer, when I'm talking to God, when I'm in that anxious moment, like because I don't really know what to pray for. I don't really know how to ask, like in a situation like even like what we're in with the virus and quarantining and social distancing and all that stuff, how do I know what to pray for? And I don't really, because I don't have the perspective,
Right.
and so, and I can't control it. And the one who can control it cares for me, and that's all I know, and that's my only source of rest. So, but when I go into that prayer, it's sort of a heart posture of, Lord, I want to want the things that I would want if I could see things from your perspective.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's so far
I feel like I'm
removed.
there a lot. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm there of I want to want
Yeah.
what I know is best. I find myself there more than actually wanting the thing itself. Recognizing that I should want
Yeah.
what I should want.
Like we're so far, like the perspective is removed, the ability to control is so far removed that I'm just left with I desire to want the things that I would want if I could see things from God's perspective.
Yeah.
And that's really far removed from me even, that means I don't know what's best. I mean, it's I don't know. It makes you feel small again. It makes you feel kind of in perspective.
Yeah.
But it also, for me, puts my heart in a position of submission to the God who is in control, who I also know cares for me.
Yeah.
And if I'm struggling to pray that prayer or want the things that I would want if I could see things from his perspective, if I'm struggling to desire that or desire to desire that, I realize that for me there is a breakdown, this is the way it is for me personally. Mm-hmm. It's not a breakdown in me feeling out of control, because that's part of the problem. Right. And it's not a breakdown necessarily in me feeling like God isn't in control. For me, the missing part is that I've doubted whether he's good.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've doubted whether what he's going to do with me and for me and around me and with the world and the people that I'm connected with is actually good.
I think it's intuitive to know that you're not in control. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes there are days where we can trick ourselves more, but I would
Sure.
say
Sure.
the average day of the week,
Yeah,
I recognize that I am not in control.
right.
Things happen that I have absolutely no say in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The world will keep spinning whenever I'm gone. I feel like
Yeah.
I kind of live in that reality. Maybe everybody doesn't, but I feel like there's a sort of an intuition to that.
Yeah.
But the problem comes in is where, how do I know that the God who is in control is good? And for me,
Right.
I mean, the entire biblical story
Mm-hmm.
has an answer for that. But specifically for me, Psalm 104 answers that.
Yeah,
And provides
well,
that
and
comfort for me.
It's interesting how much of Genesis it kind of glosses
Right.
over
Well,
and uses as a springboard.
Yeah, and so what stuck out to me lately is so when Jesus says to, and we talked about this a little earlier before we started recording this, how Jesus isn't just saying, when he says to ponder the ravens, the lilies, or consider, right?
Right.
That's not he's not saying like, hey, for example.
Right.
He means to ponder them.
Yeah.
And to consider them, that it's
Yeah.
like the whole Bible, it's ancient Jewish meditation in the sense that we're meant to really reflect on these things. And somebody I mean, look outside like today.
Yeah.
The weather is beautiful.
Yeah, today's a good day to go outside and
Amidst
consider the ravens.
all of the absolute chaos right now,
Right.
you look outside in sort of the natural world, just the birds in your backyard, the animals. You kind of see your own little mini Psalm 104 happening in your backyard. And you're just kind of reminded. And you sit and you soak that in and you ponder it. And I think that's what's kind of been going around in my mind lately, because it's not easy to do that. Yeah, it's not easy. I think that's probably
Yeah.
something worth mentioning. This isn't this is a process. It's not really like the switch flips and, oh, good. Now I'm gonna trust that God's good, and
All my problems are gone.
it's okay now.
Yeah.
That's why you have to ponder, because it isn't easy and it is a process. And we have years and years of setting up our own ways of seeing the world that will fight against this way of thinking.
Yeah.
So it takes time, and it requires pondering and considering.
Right. And and jumping back to Jesus' words in Luke 12, and maybe this is the beginning of a discussion for another time, but probably so. But that idea of fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So Jesus is connecting, our powerlessness with God's powerfulness, his care for us. But he's actually going more specific than just remember God cares for you and wants what's best for you. He's saying that the byproduct of God working in your life and being in control and being sovereign and doing all those things for his people is to ultimately give them the kingdom of God.
Out of good pleasure.
Yeah.
Not out of obligation or
Right.
out of not reluctance. It's like a sense of overwhelmingly like joyful giving.
Right.
He wants to give these things. And that's what...
Yeah, he cares for you.
Yeah.
And what his care produces for you is his kingdom.
Right.
Which then puts you in a position where you're then free to sell what you have to give to people who don't have it. And place your heart somewhere else than in the things that you think will help give you more control over the life that you don't ultimately control. But then the question is, if knowing I'm not in control doesn't help, if knowing God is in control doesn't help, if knowing that God even cares, or that God is in control doesn't help, if knowing that the God who is in control also cares for me more than I care for myself doesn't help, it seems like the next thing to consider is if his care for me is ultimately to produce for me his kingdom. Maybe I should get to know his kingdom.
Right. Because it's not... I find it interesting that at the end there, he brings it back to the kingdom. And like kind of what we were saying at the beginning about the flock, right? That this is a corporate reality.
Yeah. That it's then at the end of the day, maybe the fact that it's not about me is what will help unravel some of these things. But
right. So what would you? That sounds great, right?
Right.
But what would you say to that in this time that we're in now, in which the kingdom together, the flock, right, is separated to units of maybe 2 or 3 at home, or just one?
Right.
How does that work?
Yeah, I think that there's a, I think one of the greatest temptations that we experience is that sense of being alone. That no one else is either struggling with the thing I struggle with, or no one really will understand what I'm going through, or and it can lead us to all sorts of, either depression and isolation, or pride, thinking that we've conquered things other people haven't, or whatever else, or that we're dealing with things other people don't know about, and that makes
which is
us special.
in a way sort of prideful.
Yeah,
it's like an inverted pride.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's sort of the delusion of the moment, is that we are isolated. I'm trying to think how to describe it. I realize that everybody that I have had a discipleship relationship with, I have spoken with in some capacity in the last week. You know, everyone that I've walked with at some level, I continue to walk with at some level. The forms of those connections have changed.
Right.
You know, yesterday I spent an hour with someone on FaceTime walking through a part of Mark, because that's what we were studying before we couldn't meet anymore. And so we still talk, and we still talk about Mark and what the Gospel of Mark means to us, and how it's disturbing us, and you know, Jesus is you know, the narrative there is, you know, is changing our life. So I think that for me, what I had to jump out of and kind of shake off was this temptation to think that I'm alone. And I realized that everybody that I was walking with is a phone call away.
Yeah.
And not only a phone call away, but most of them are a phone call away, and that phone call is in 5 minutes, but it's an hour.
Yeah.
You know, it's a long conversation that no one is, you know, they're a text message or a FaceTime. You know, no one's really that far away, thankfully, because of where we are in with technology. But that sense of turning in and saying, I'm isolated, I'm alone, I'm not a part of the flock, it takes maybe a different kind of effort, you know. But I think that one thing that I've noticed, that I've talked to a few people about, that I think, this is kind of maybe a side conversation, but I feel like it's a lot like okay, like truth in the middle of suffering, right? When you're going through a difficult time, that's not really the time when you need to start processing why bad things happen to good people. And you know what I mean, or like, how could a good God allow suffering and things like you, when I'm in the middle of like some tragedy, I don't hear very well. You know,
Right.
I don't have the bandwidth to process that. What helps me in those moments of tragedy and suffering and difficulty or whatever is the truth that I've been in up to the point to where I can't take in any more truth. You know.
Yeah.
And I feel like right now, what I'm experiencing with community is very similar. The community and the flock that I've kind of practically and functionally been connected to, up to the point to where I cannot practically and functionally connect anymore, is who I have.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not making or creating really new discipleship meetings during the week.
Yeah.
You know, I'm connecting with who I've been connected with. No more, hardly, and no less.
Right. Well, and so what's kind of try to round this back around to what we were talking about.
Please.
Well, no, but I think what it takes effort, because I think the world and Twitter and news will want you to not believe that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That it's not, in a sense, that it's not so difficult to keep in contact with the people that you that you were already walking with, right?
Right.
And it kind of takes the effort in the moment to sit back and to ponder and consider and adopt a different way of thinking than what we are being sort of fed, I guess, right?
Right. Right.
You have to change your entire sort of mode of thinking of the world, right? To more of a kingdom-centered
Right.
way of realizing that God is generous and
Yeah.
wanting to give
Yeah.
these
He's
things
toward his flock.
toward his flock.
And so this is applicable to me to the degree that I put myself into the flock, right?
Yeah.
That it's and then in seasons like this, it's really easy to feel like I'm not a part of a flock. I will say that, you know, there's been times in my life when tragedy has struck and I don't really have a lot of bandwidth, but I push forward anyway because I know I need to know something. I know I need some truth. I know I need something right now. So I do think in this season, it is a little more difficult to cultivate,
Oh, yeah.
connections and community. And you may be calling someone that you would normally just say, well, when I see them at church on Sunday, I'll see if they want to get coffee this week.
Yeah.
Well, now you can't go get coffee, and you won't see them at church on Sunday. So,
Yeah.
so you're left with having to put yourself out there and just contact them directly, kind of go out of your way to make a phone call or send a text or find them on social media, and say, I don't have anybody right now, and I want to be functionally walking with people. Can we call and talk and walk through a portion of Scripture together? Or can we meet at a park maybe, or something kind of open air? I don't know. I mean, everyone use your own discretion, but I mean, I think that, there is a narrative that will get pushed, which is that you're on your own. You need to take care of you. No one else is going to be there for you. So you better go get your toilet paper before they sell out.
Yeah.
And that's not the kingdom we live in.
Right.
So anyway, I think. I think that's what I've had to shake off. I've had to shake off that lie that I am alone.
You have to shake off the lie and put on a different way of seeing the world in the situation that we're in that reflects what Jesus is trying to tell us in Luke, based on the way that God describes his world to us in the rest of Scripture.
For sure.
And it's applicable to everything, and it's especially applicable now in this time.
Yeah, I think that he had an assumption of God being in control that existed in the minds and the hearts of the people he was talking to. He could start there. We may not have that same assumption. We may think that God's not in control, or we may, whatever. But I do think that if we can get our worldview in line with the Old Testament scriptures and carry that into the New Testament scriptures, we do hear these encouragements that you're not in control. God is in control. The God who is in control cares for you more than he cares for himself, and he cares for you so much that out of that good pleasure, he is doing everything in your life and in the lives of the people that you're around to bring about the reality of the kingdom.
And I think I've talked with a couple people over the past few weeks about this time that we kind of find ourselves in. One thing that's I don't know how to necessarily phrase it. That's maybe a positive. It could be a negative too, I suppose. But it exposes. This time is kind of exposing people's our priorities and our vantage point of the way that we see the world and the way that we think of God and the way that God interacts with the world. Not just the fact that we have a lot more alone time now, but the fact that all of the other sort of distractions in life have been pushed away. I think kind of exposes your core belief about the world and how the world functions in relation to you, and how that influences the way that you interact with God and think that he is interacting with you in the midst of all of this. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the driving forces for so much of what we do is the denial of death.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And now we're forced with having to stay home and not engage in all of so many of those things that we used to use to distract ourselves from the reality of our own mortality.
Yeah.
And the reason why we can't do those things is because
of
people are
death.
dying. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we
So you're kind of
you're faced with and so it all kind of comes to the surface, and
there's nowhere to run.
Yeah, the reality of limitation of our personal limitations is so great. The only hope is that there is a God who is in control, and because we can't, even what Jesus points out there, we can't add to our life.
Yeah, you can't even do such a small thing such as that, is the way he puts it, right?
Yeah.
Don't you love that? Like that, like a little bit of shade thrown. Like, you can't even add an hour to your life. Such a small thing such as that,
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah. But
Talk about a perspective shift.
Right. But it also means, if you go into Proverbs and other places, it means we can't take an hour away either.
Right.
Like there's God's in control of that. And that may not that only will comfort you insofar as that you know he cares for you, and his care for you will only comfort you insofar that you understand that his care will bring about the kingdom, and his kingdom will only comfort you insofar as you feel connected to the flock.
Right. I mean, it comes back to that. I don't think I have the exact quote pulled up, but what Tozer talks about. I think he talks about it in Knowledge of the Holy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably, maybe. About
He talks about most things in Knowledge of the Holy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. About, what we think of God is one of the most important things about us. I think he says the most important thing about you is what you think of God.
Right.
And so if that portrait of God is anything but good and generous and loving, then you can have all of his other attributes, quote unquote, figured out, but they won't make sense and they will fall apart unless that is at the core.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love this passage in Luke, and Psalm 104 is always a great one. But
I mean, it's talking about rock badgers.
I know,
Come
right? You're not like a passage about rock badgers. But I think that for me, it's an encouragement to pursue what his kingdom is, what his kingdom means. What does it mean for him to be king and for me to be connected as a citizen with all these other people that have Jesus as their king? And how do I fight the fight and put forth the extra effort in this season to maintain that sense of connection? Right. And if you don't have it, it will take more energy than when things are going well. Right. But that's why you pursue the truth about the realities of suffering when you're not suffering.
Yeah.
It's why you pursue community when you don't feel alone.
Yeah.
It's why in some ways, you save money when you have money. So because you know that one day you will suffer, you will feel alone, and you won't have as much money, and you're going to need money, and you're going to need people, and you're going to need truth. And so, I mean, the money thing is more of a practical illustration, maybe not a spiritual principle, but that's.
What was it that Jesus said about storing up money for yourself?
Yeah, that's right. You want to give it away, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I get it.
The same principle is there. When you don't feel like you need something, you still need it. You still need truth. You still need the community. You still need the connection to the flock. Because when you actually get to a point when you feel like you need it, it's going to be a lot harder to actually get it. At least that's been my experience.
No, I agree. I agree. Yeah. Well, and just to kind of, I guess maybe kind of wrap it up here. You mentioned about how we kind of touched on this passage, the version in Matthew, a couple weeks ago here at church. And I had kind of taken some notes on that, but when you were talking about how the root of anxiety essentially is trying to control what is not ours to control, right?
Sure.
We've talked about that already.
Yeah.
But what is frequently overlooked, right, is the desire to rule with God as an image bearer. Yeah. That's a gift that he gave to us. Yeah. And anxiety is just really the result of that good desire to be in control to an extent. We were created to have
to rule and reign.
And reign.
Exactly.
Have our little our share of that. So I mean really just our anxiety is an evidence to that awesome truth that has been really screwed up. Because we doubt that he's good. Right. So or that we think that he is withholding something from us and that he is not.
Yeah, when we try to figure out the good and the bad on our own. I mean, it's the sin of the first parents.
And not just figure out the good and the bad, but take something that we think God is withholding from us because we believe that he is not fully good or loving. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which ties it right back in.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, and how do we just submit that over to Him and be back in the kingdom, knowing that it is in the kingdom of God that we will then be able to rule and reign alongside Him and actually have that original good desire fulfilled, in the ways that He intended.
Yeah, and when you seek the kingdom, the rest will be added. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's the C.S. Lewis kind of rephrasing of that. If you seeking after heaven and earth,
you get the rest thrown in.
Yeah. Yeah. If you aim for earth, you lose heaven and earth. If you aim for heaven, you get earth thrown in.
Yeah.
I think that's the general principle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Spencer, thank you for hanging out. This was fun. And I think that what we wanted to do today was just, we had no real notes here. This was a kind of an extemporaneous conversation.
Yeah.
That we wanted just to kind of do what we would typically do.
Kind of weekly.
Yeah, what we do when we sit down together weekly and look at the Bible. We pick a passage, or maybe we're going through something and we just pick up where we left off.
We used to be a bit more intentional about actually reading through a book, but nowadays it's kind of just
now it's
whatever we have both been thinking about.
Where have you been? Where have you been? What passage you've been in?
Which could just be about anything.
Yeah,
at this point.
And so today, Spencer had been in Luke 12, and I was recently in Matthew, a very similar passage, and so that's what we were going to discuss today. And so we thought that instead of just doing it ourselves, we would share it as a conversation for everyone to listen in on.
And to use as an encouragement to do this with the people that you have around you, or that are just a phone call away.
Exactly.
And to just kind of meditate on Luke 12 and Psalm 104. Get those two sort of foundational.
And I love the way you said it. Allow
them to read each other.
Allow them to read each other.
Yeah.
That
has really been beneficial for me.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it'll be beneficial to all you too.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. We will talk to you soon.
Yep. Bye.